Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for jumping on and lending your time with us, your lunch hour here with us today for our next quarterly faith community meeting. We're pretty excited about this one. We have Luke Barker speaking from the Mental Health and Recovery Board of Portage County, as well as Mike Castelli, the lead pastor for the chapel in Green. I saw Carla was on here. I think she either probably had a call or got kicked off or something. So hopefully she'll be able to come on, because I noticed this morning when I sent our reminder out, I didn't see her registered, and I was like, this is your meeting. Because she and I had met with Luke before, found that meeting and discussion really powerful and really informative and really valuable, and was something that we wanted to bring to our staff as well as the community as well. And then she was the one who recommended Pastor Castelli to come speak with us today. So I'm glad everyone was able to make it for these presentations, and thank you to our speakers for jumping on as well and bringing some really valuable information. The topic for this month is supporting the mental health of older adults in the community. So we're kind of straying away from the professional side of things a little bit today to start talking about these meaningful relationships that we have with the older adults, either in our faith communities or our friends, neighbors, loved ones, and things like that. And I know they both brought some really great advice, some really great professional input, resources, things like that. So without further ado, I will turn it over to Luke to get us started. We'll do some questions after that, and then move into Pastor Castelli's presentation, and then I'll set you free on your Friday.
Thank you, Courtney, and thank you to Direction Homes for having us and having us talk. I look forward to this and kind of get into things here. I just threw a few slides together, kind of an overview. You can go to the next slide. I know Karen Kravitz, our associate director, was going to join. I think she still may join, might be on a call or something, but she could also answer any questions you may have that I might not be able to answer with the board or anything like that. But as Courtney said, my name is Luke Barker. I'm a licensed professional clinical counselor. I specialize in trauma, ADHD, sports psych, relaxation, a couple other things, but I see all disorders, all age groups, pretty much everybody. So I work in a private practice on the side, evenings, weekends, so I still, to maintain my license, but as Courtney said, I work for the Mental Health and Recovery Board in Portage County as the clinical manager. So it's a brief, quick background for me, and at any time, I know there's questions after, but if anybody needs any clarification for anything that I go over, feel free to just let me know. That's no big deal. But some of the objectives that I want to do relatively quick, just a very brief overview of mental health and mental illness, discuss depression, anxiety, suicide and suicide data, discuss isolation, and Q&A. I will say that once we get into, that's okay, you can go to the next one. Once we get into the few slides on depression, anxiety, and stuff, those topics I cover in like each one of those are like an entire session with a client. So it's a lot of stuff to process, but I'm going to try to fly through it. Like I said, I'll have my contact information up here as well. If anybody has any questions or further clarification, you can definitely reach out. So when we get into kind of talking about mental health, like Courtney said, I want to be a little bit less professional and more focused on kind of how I talk about it with clients, specifically for this, geared a little bit more toward the older population. I stress a lot that it's a state of well-being. So it's not just something that's not all the time. It's not something that's always drastic, and it affects multiple areas of our life. Like this slide says here, it'll involve changes in emotions, thinking, or behavior, or a combination beyond normal limits. And I always stress normal because that's different for everybody. But it's just a matter of, do we feel like this is something that is not, typical for us? And that's when, as professionals and different things like that, it comes into play very important when you're talking about how to define that for everybody. And I think that's really important to know. Is like when we go into here, like say a coworker or somebody, or someone in the church is saying, hey, such and such is dealing with depression. If you go into that thinking about symptoms and the DSM and diagnosis, and exactly you're looking for something specific, can kind of throw you off when you see something completely different. And I think it's really important for people to be, and I'll talk about person first language here soon, to be human, to be as human as possible and try to really understand people. And I think a lot of times we put on our clinical hats because we have a lot of training and we have all these things. And it's like, you know, we know to do this, this, and this when we see this, and we kind of forget to be human every once in a while. So I think it's really important to take a step back at times. And, you know, and then obviously when you get into some of the more, you know, professional type stuff, you're talking about the severity, duration, and complexity, which would determine when things become problematic. And, you know, a stat that I saw that I always repeat when I do presentations like this, that is 20% of adults will experience mental illness during the course of a year. I think that's skewed probably a little bit lower because that's reported. And so it's probably significantly higher than that, but that's still a very high number. You can, next slide. This is probably my favorite slide when talking about mental illness, is actually to talk about what it isn't. Yeah, because I push person first language more than anything when doing these, and kind of just in general. And I always try to let people know how important it is. When we hear labels all the time, you know, the example here on the slide is, you know, you're a person with schizophrenia versus you are a schizophrenic. Those labels have a lot of power, and not always in a good way. Sometimes they can be helpful, but labels tend to make people feel as if it is permanent, it is a characteristic of themselves, and that it'll never be managed to a reasonable level, and that's just not true. And you know, some of the stats that I put on here, it's not a major cause of violence. So mental illness is not a major cause of violence in our society, and that's kind of I think the stigma is getting better around it. And when I get into one of the things that when I was talking with Courtney and everybody at Direction Homes was I told them that I don't use the terms depression or anxiety. And that always gets a weird response every once in a while because I'm a clinician. But I think with the push with, and you can go to the next slide. I think I should jump into some of this. Yeah. So with a push with mental illness and the stigmas reducing is great. I think there is so many great things that have come from, you know, everybody starting to understand and recognizing how important it is and all that. But the downfall of that is you can see a depression screen on social media platforms every 3 seconds. It'll say, do you want to know if you have depression? And you can answer 10 questions and it's going to pop out an answer. That's not necessarily good. So with all this push for mental health, you also have, there's a downside of it too, to where more people are aware, which is good, but now people sometimes will hyper focus on things. And some people will go, oh, I never knew I had depression. I took this thing online and now I have it. Oh no, what's wrong with me? And so there's that side of it too, that you got to pay attention to. So I don't like to use the terms depression or anxiety. I use stress and sadness. There's also a lower, I don't even know how to put it. It puts people's mind at ease a little bit more when I say, okay, hey, we're going to work on the sadness today, not we're going to work on depression. People feel as it's more attainable to overcome. And I truly believe that you know, depression can be quote unquote cured. I hate using that word in any field, but you know, can be cured if it is worked properly and it is and things are taken care of in a good way. So I treat it as, you know, quote unquote depression and the DSM and all that. But I don't like to verbalize that as much, because even though the stigma is dropped, like I said, it's different with everybody. And like I said that before, it can be different from person to person that has similar interests and all this, it doesn't matter. It can be different with every single person. So you have to take the time to do that. This is one of the sections that I said I will spend an entire session on explaining. I talk a lot about the mind and how it works, and I try to provide a lot of education, because I believe the more you know about yourself, the more you know about what's going on, you know, in your head, the easier it is to handle. I use the term the mind is stuck a lot. So when you talk about depression or sadness, that is being upset about something that has already happened. And I always tell people your mind has no idea that if something is happening now or has happened in the past. It just reacts to a thought and believes it's happening now. So when I am talking to individuals about this, I will talk about that and I will explain that. And what I'm trying to do, and what I hope everybody can kind of take away from this, is to understand. I'm trying to get people to understand what's happening in the moment, because that's right now. I tell people all the time that on paper this is all going to make sense. It's going to be it just logically it makes perfect sense. You're like, yeah, like I get that. My mind's stuck, but in the moment, all that goes out the window. And that's what I try to explain, that we are going to try to kind of get this ingrained into your mind to understand a little bit more about patterns in your mind and patterns and all that stuff too. So being stuck just means that your mind doesn't become present. You're not in the present moment. And then which is the basis of all of those different activities and grounding techniques and all those, because your mind is trying to determine whether it's safe or not. And depression is very, very relevant. 1 in 5 adults have been diagnosed with depression in Ohio based off the latest study in 2020 from the CDC, or that's from APA actually. It can be caused by multiple factors. That's important when discussing with individuals, because a lot of times when people come into my office or talk to me, they will truly believe that they have no idea where it came from. And it's really, really important to communicate with them that that's quote unquote normal, that's okay, but we're going to figure out where it came from, and give them that, because there's a sense of hopelessness when it comes to depression, and where it feels like nothing is working. And if we can start to figure out, hey, where is it coming from? And whether that is working with medical professionals, whoever, if it's genetics, biology, anything like that. But if we can start to determine some answers, you start instilling some more hope. And that's the root of all that, is you want to start to instill power within themselves and hope. And that's what we want to do. Like I said, with the person first language stuff, it can be treated. It does not have to be permanent. And I hear that all the time. And one of the reasons that I really like using person first language is because I'll have people tell me like nothing works. I've tried everything. And I always say, like, I love when people say that, because you haven't. And I want to prove you wrong in the best way possible. And let's try to figure it out. And even if it's just creating a perspective shift, it's still going to be something different than they haven't tried. And that's where the creative mind kind of comes in. And you may have to reword things a little bit differently. But when I always tell people, when I'm even like the best example for this is when I do anger management, I tell people that, say it's a 10-session class, I tell them we're only going to talk about anger for 1 session. And they're always confused. They're like, I thought this was anger management, because 9 times out of 10, probably 10 out of 10, but I don't like saying that the symptoms and the problems that we're dealing with aren't the problem. They're your mind's answer. So if we focus strictly on the, quote unquote, depression or the anger, we are just focusing on the answer that you've already chosen. So right there is a perspective shift that I provide with clients and provide with people, that gets them to look at it in a different way. And that's another reason why I don't use depression a lot in session, or anxiety. You can move on to the next slide. I'm going to do my best to not rant, but this stuff obviously interests me, so I'll try to keep it limited as much as possible. Anxiety is essentially the opposite of depression, where your mind is stuck, but instead of being worried about something that has already happened in the past, which is what will cause depression, you're worried about something that may happen in the future. But once again, it's the same exact pattern in your mind. It doesn't know that it's not happening now. So it is reacting as if it is happening now. So if it's in the past, that is depression based. If it is in the future, it's anxiety based. But either way, it is not present, which is once again why those grounding techniques and different things like that would work, because it's trying to get your mind to understand that it is not present and that it is safe. So one of the best things that I try to provide with people when talking about anxiety or stress is we have a feeling of there's nothing we can do, hopelessness, powerlessness, like there isn't a choice. to me, that's a siren going off in your mind to do something. And then people always tell me like, yeah, but I don't know what to do. Deep breathing doesn't work. I just keep thinking about it or anything. And I always tell people, you have to find something to do. You have to provide an answer for your mind. And when you do that, it can be anything, and you have to get rid of the idea that it's not going to work immediately, and that's okay. That's a hard one to get across to people, and it's a hard one to kind of wrap your head around in the moments, because it's like, I need relief, I want relief. But we have this idea in our minds that if I do this because my counselor, my pastor, my doctor, my fill in the blank, it doesn't matter, if I do this, I will feel better. What we don't tell ourselves is that I will feel better if I continue to do it, but I may not feel better right away. That's extremely important when talking to any population, to let them know that. Because if it feels like it's not working, it doesn't mean it's not working. It's just your mind it takes a little time to get pulled out of that stuckness, if you will. And it takes a little bit more effort than we think. So a lot of people will give up on these interventions and will give up on these strategies way before they should, because it's not working right away. And it's really important to stress to people that that's okay and that's normal. And if it's not working to where you want, try something else. But when we fall into lags and when we fall into, downward spirals, is when we stop trying to do something. And that's what we want to try to push away from. It doesn't have to be, very strenuous or anything like that, but our mind needs to do something. Because if it's not doing something, it gets stuck. And that's when all those racing thoughts and different things come in. And, for the second time, I'll try to speed up, sorry. But question I can answer that. Do you want me to answer that then? Yeah, so it says, what is the best way to encourage folks to keep trying when they when they haven't seen the results? So what I always tell people is, if they haven't seen a result, it means that they don't feel like this is going to work. So therefore I will try something else. There are millions of different things that you can try. Most people, so actually lead into the next section too. Most people actually have the fear of trying something or starting something. And actually not this section, but I'll get to it in a minute. And it's not a matter of not doing it. So when they haven't seen the results, you want to either encourage them that it is going to work, encouragement will work there, or try something that they have never tried before. Whether that is, like in session, something that is not very popular among every population is forms of meditation, guided meditation, different things like that. A lot of people be like, absolutely not. I am not doing that. And I'll say, yes, you can absolutely frame it as a goal to achieve too, as well. I'll talk about that towards the end as well, when I talk about proving people wrong in the 10% method. But yeah, so one of the things that I'll tell people is like, okay, let's just try it. This is like wearing a new pair of shoes. Sometimes you hate them. They're not comfortable. You don't like them, but then when you break them in a little bit, they work. They're okay. And one of my favorite things to say, two things, is if things don't change, things won't change. It sounds very simple, but it's very true. So we need to try something different. And then another thing going along with that, and with anxiety and getting people to try different things and work it out a little bit, I'll ask them if they feel okay. Just to be honest with you, most people don't come into my office if they feel okay. So I know the answer to that question. And I'll tell them, okay, then we need to do something different. I said, if you're okay with how you feel, you're okay with how things are going, get up, walk out that office and call me if you need me. And that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But if you're not okay and there's some changes that you want to do, you may have to try something new. You may have to try something a little bit different. Doesn't mean it has to be drastic. Let's just try something different. So that's how I frame things, how we can try different things if someone's not seeing a result. You can move to the next slide. So why is all these things important, especially when you're talking about the older population, suicide? There's a bunch of stats there. You can read through them. I won't read through them to bore you with those. These are why, things like these discussions are important. Suicide is a very real event. And the biggest thing that I want to stress with suicide is that it's okay to talk about. I think that's one of the biggest misconceptions with suicide by far, that the word is kind of taboo. The topic is taboo. And you'll see that most people, even when they're having a suicidal ideation or anything like that, in my experience, are willing to talk about it. And if it's not treated as taboo in the moment, it's actually a good thing. Unintentionally, when we kind of beat around the bush, or we're not very kind of direct about it, or we hint about it, we're unintentionally increasing the stigma around suicide. Not on purpose. And we're definitely not doing that on purpose. But what we're doing is we're saying like, oh, this is something that we shouldn't talk about because it's hard to talk about and we don't want to talk about it. And that all makes sense. And it's out of very good faith. But in reality, then it makes everyone hard to talk about it. So how can we work through something that we can't talk about? So that's important to keep in mind, that it's not easy at first to talk about. I'm not going to lie to you. It's hard to do. But, with practice and convincing yourself that you're capable of doing that, you can do that, and you can talk to people about that. And it's okay to talk to people about that, or have people find somebody that can talk with them. I see a question that says, if you always do what you have always done, yes, absolutely. Yeah. And I have it written in my office, not here. Things don't change, things won't change. And it's the silliest, dumbest saying, and I love it because it's absolutely true. You can move to the next slide. I'm going to try to speed up. I knew I was going to go on rants. So with these ones, with isolation, we all know the downfalls of isolation. And, it comes from all kinds of things, especially in older populations. There's some of the warning signs there. It can lead to all kinds of problems. But I think the main topic that I want to stress for this discussion is, what do we do about it? And what can we do to prevent it? Probably the best example I can give, I had an older gentleman that used to race bicycles his whole life. And as he got older, he lost function in it. And that was his passion, no longer could do it. And you can imagine somebody that was literally, it was his career, it was everything. It got taken away from him relatively, as he felt, rapidly. So you have to look at things in a little bit different. You have to try new things, and something that leads to isolation is it'll lead to, symptoms of depression, to where we just don't enjoy things anymore. But that's our mind lying to us. We don't enjoy things the way we used to enjoy things when we could do different things. There's a massive difference. And that is kind of the key that I hone in on. It's not a matter of not enjoying things. It's comparing how we feel when we do them now to 20 years ago, to 10 months ago, to 10 minutes ago. It doesn't matter. But we are thinking in our minds that we used to enjoy something because we were a different person, physically, mentally, all kinds of things. So it's just reframing things to where, okay, what can we do now? And you're still capable of doing that. With the male population, this actually got put on here because of my grandpa. He always tells me when he stops doing things, he'll be done. And he's 86 years old and still works in the yard. And it's just, he does too much, but that's just all he knows. And his whole motivation when something goes a little bit south, he had to have some knee replacements or anything like that. His whole motivation is to prove someone wrong. That's not a great intervention for some populations, but for quite a bit, it is. You just got to make sure that it's framed in a positive way, so it's not proving someone wrong like in a negative way, because that can go bad as well. Really quick, I want to talk about what's called the 10% method. If you forget anything, forget everything that I said today. I'd love for somebody to remember the 10% method. I also call it the Just Start method. I use this with almost every single one of my clients. Had a session last night, and this is all we talked about. Most people, like I said a little bit earlier, have a fear of getting started rather than doing a task. So let's say, this is a very easy example. Let's say you have to write a paper for college. Most people think about, when they do that, how long it's going to take, what they have to do, all kinds of stuff, and 900 different things other than writing a paper. You don't think about turning on your computer, opening up a Word document, putting your name on. That's 10%. So I always tell people, if that's the case, do that. Put your name on it, turn the laptop off, leave, do something else. Let's say like if you want to use exercise or something like that, get on the treadmill, walk for a minute, get off, be done for the day. And what you'll see is you'll start to train your mind that you're actually not upset about doing the task. You're upset about getting in the mood to do it. But if you just tell yourself, I'm going to do it 10% of the time that I normally would, and I'm going to stop, you'll see over time that it'll change to where you'll be doing 10, 12, 15% at a time. And then you realize that you'll go back to it a lot quicker. It's just, you start to train your mind that the task isn't the problem. It's just, we don't feel like doing A, B, C, and D leading up to it. And that's something that I share with a lot of clients. And I'd be more than happy to give anybody more information on that. But for sake of time, I just wanted to stress that a little bit. So that is a very, very brief, quick overview. As I said, those slides, like those topics, I spend an entire session on each, especially the mind. But I wanted to kind of give a brief overview. And like I said, I would be more than happy to talk with anybody outside of this, if anybody has any questions. I don't know if we're doing question answers total at the end or now. Oh, yes. Okay. So
we can go now.
Okay. Does anybody have any other questions that weren't in the chat or anything?
I'm curious what you recommended for the gentleman who, competed with bikes and he was no longer able to do that. So what suggestion did you have for him?
Yeah, so what we did was I'm a believer in finding the root cause of what's really going on. And the root cause of underneath of that, he felt like he could no longer be competitive and he could no longer push himself. So what we did was we tried to find something that he could physically do. Ended up being actually, which was very interesting, ended up being woodworking, which you would think still be, but he was able to sit and do that. He felt that if he wasn't pushed, he wasn't capable of doing anything. And he's never done woodworking. And I like woodworking, so I just said it one day. And he's like, all right, I'm going to try it. And then that kind of went into all kinds of things and then led to other things. And then we used the other side of competitiveness. That was his release. So I also taught him how to do self-meditation, in which he was 1,000% against the entire time until he tried it. And then we tried it a few times. So then we kind of hit both ends of that. It's able to have that mental release and escape without literally escaping, being on a bike and going, a couple miles or anything like that. So he kind of hit both the competitive side and being able to push himself because he's never tried something, and it kind of still had the values for that. And then also I taught him how to meditate and do some mindfulness stuff as well. Yes, 10%. I see a question that says, does 10% method work for hoarding? 100%, yes. Hoarding usually goes down to a core that we will lie to ourselves and say that if we get rid of this, we would need it, and then we'll feel helpless. So that's the kind of route that we'll take is, okay, can you get rid of something? Even if it's something that we have to add, that's how I start with hoarding. I know that sounds kind of the opposite, but we will give them something that they can get rid of. So whether it's a piece of paper that we crumble up, take it home, put it on something, tomorrow I want you to throw it away. So it doesn't have any emotional value. So yes, you absolutely can do the 10% method. Sometimes with hoarding, you might have to start with a 1%, but it's just about starting. The other name that I have for that, because sometimes numbers freak people out, is the just start method. Just start something. You don't have to finish it. You don't even have to do anything. Just start it and then stop. So yes, it works. I apply it to literally everything. Okay, so it says, how does the mind being stuck relate to communication with those living with Alzheimer's and dementia? So that's a very specific scenario when you talk about the mind being stuck, and that is to where you kind of want to, as we say in clinical terms, roll with the punches with something like that, to where you're not necessarily explaining how the mind is being stuck and we can get it out of that rapidly and permanently, but how do you do that in the moment? And that's how, when we're talking with the Alzheimer's and dementia population, is you can teach somebody to how to get out of that feeling of being stuck in the moment. And it's more rapid based rather than long term. So you kind of just adjust it to where it's not all the time. We're going to focus on, okay, how do we not feel stuck for 5 minutes rather than permanently, if that makes sense. Or distract them as well. Yes, you can do distract them, which is a grounding technique, an external grounding technique with somebody else. So yes, that's another way to do it as well. Any other questions? Okay. Like I said, feel free to write my information down, email, call, anything like that. If you got any questions, feel free to reach out. Thank you.
All right. Thanks so much, Luke. And I got a couple questions in the chat as well. We are recording today, so I'll send out the recording of this presentation as well as Pastor Castelli's, as well as the PowerPoint slides and that handout that Luke sent out that I forwarded on to you all this morning. If you were registered in time, I'll re-forward that out as well. It's a really great handout. I know some of it is focused on Portage County exclusively, but there are several pages in there that I find really useful. So definitely make sure you take a look at that. And on a similar note, I did throw in a slide on here for national resources, and I included that in that email sent out this morning as well. So I'll re-forward that out later today too, with the link and all of that stuff. There are no other questions for Luke. While we have them, I will turn it over to Pastor Castelli.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, and thanks, Luke. That was really good. It's we're all in the area and so-called business of helping people and wanting people to be well. So a lot of things you said resonated with me, and even connect a bit with some of the things that I hope to share, and some of the things that we aim for. So great to speak to everyone, and great to share some thoughts on how we try and support our older adults in a faith-based community, in a faith community like this. And so I guess I'll say this up front. I don't know that we've got it all figured out, right? People are complicated, and people are tough to figure out. But with humility, we keep trying to do better at everything in terms of what we're moving toward. So I would start like this with some things to consider. And I think the thing that draws my mind here a bit, something I learned long ago when I was quite a bit younger, and doing this, speaking with a pastor who specifically ministered to the older community in the midst of the church. And he made a comment once. We were in the middle of talking about some challenges that were going on, and some complaints that were being issued. And, one of the, sadly, sometimes the older folks in the midst of a church and a faith community like ours, like a Christian church like this, sometimes, the older folks get listed as a bit grumpy. And I think I said to him long ago, I said, so why, where's the complaint coming from? Why is there a problem here? And he quickly and gently pointed something out. And he said, listen, this is a group that is dealing with so much change in their life. And I never looked at an older adult as someone who's dealing with a lot of change. Sometimes we'll look at a young adult that's getting out of high school and going into the marketplace, or going into college, a young family that's having kids, or getting, someone's getting married, or, that's life events and life change. But his comment really caught me. And then he proceeded to explain it. And in the context of that change, not just being change, but change that is negative, change that is oftentimes associated with loss. And I think this kind of shapes why we do what we do, or how we try and do it. And what that loss is. It's predominantly, the changes going on in their life, that they're setting things aside, they're losing things. At a certain age, maybe loss of a job, or loss of mobility as you get older. That's clearly part of it. Obviously, loss of health that they're going through, and that's constant change and movement that way. This is a big one when considering this group in the midst of a church, a faith community. Loss of familiarity. right? The things that they were used to, the things that they used to be able to rest upon or connect with, they're changed on them. They're in the midst of things being, as it feels to them, oftentimes being taken away from them. I mean, my father just turned 85 years old, and I would extend the idea of loss of familiarity to the way our world changes, not just in the midst of a faith community, a church, for example, but I can barely keep up, and I have a technical background. I can't keep up with all the digital changes and this and that, and I get put to shame by my kids. Imagine what he's going through in the context of change with everyday function, loss of familiarity. It takes him forever to figure out where his mouse is pointing on the screen on the computer that I'm trying to get him to use and do emails and things like that. In the context of a faith community, that's a very big part, and oftentimes a source of potential grumpiness. There's a big loss there. This is an obvious statement, but we don't think about it often. Loss of friends and loss of loved ones. The older community experiences that way more than the rest of our community in the midst of the church, for example. They're losing friends oftentimes on a very regular basis. And some people that they're attached to, obviously because of age issues and spouses and people that are loved. And then all of that leads to, this will be very much a part of what I want to say, a loss of connection. So in a community like a faith community, that's something that we need to be very aware of, loss of connection to people and loss of connection to others. So what we're really trying to do in a faith community is enhance someone's life, but enhance someone's life spiritually, their spiritual well-being, and how they respond that way. And we obviously get to tackle that in the context of faith, and that's critical and important, and it opens doors oftentimes that you don't get to leverage maybe in your various vocations and various occupations, but we do. And even though someone can be dealing with a lot of physical loss, a lot of mobility, a lot of health and things like that, loss that way that's very physical, they can be doing very, very well as a person, we would say, and be very content with life. And that's what we're aiming for. We're aiming for that spiritual well-being of a person. And it really does boil down to trying to create active opportunities for connection. So I would say with this first point, I think I wanted to make 5 of them that are kind of on our mind and on our heart all the time in terms of a faith community. And the first and foremost would be to formulate groups. We want to formulate groups that are specifically geared toward the spiritual needs of older adults. Now we can say that, and that seems like an obvious statement, but oftentimes we don't act upon it. So I really want to say we want to specifically aim to create groups. And so what do those look like? Where are the details there? So groups that have a very strong care structure in place, and where we make it a point to know in a group, like some groups are geared around, Bible teaching, and other groups are geared around fellowship. Well, oftentimes our older groups, we want to be geared around a care structure. And what I mean by that is not so much a physical care structure, but a care in terms of knowing someone. Is there a special need or hurt going on in their lives? Are they known? Are others aware of those needs going on in your life? And sometimes we can be of material help, and sometimes we can't. Sometimes that has to be sought elsewhere. But to know that others are aware of your circumstances is sometimes doing those are the intangible, like praying for someone and asking in a faith community, just to be asked in terms of what's going on in someone's life, and to be checking up on somebody. It's amazing. That in and of itself meets a need in a life, because it reminds them that they're known and someone is involved with them. So it doesn't have to be incredibly material. It can be just asking and checking and obviously praying for other individuals in terms of a well-being. Have these groups, in these groups, have opportunities for extra activities outside of what you might think of in a faith group the day they meet. I mean, if you're a Jewish group, you meet on Sabbath, on Saturday. If you're a Christian church, you meet on Sunday. The good groups with our older community actually create opportunities to get together and do things together, where you're doing trips, you're taking day trips, where you're coordinating and you're organizing get together. The engagements add a variety, a spice to life that's sometimes missing as you get older and you begin to lose mobility. So to coordinate and organize and construct those things in the context of a faith group is really healthy. It's really good. We've seen great fruit be born in terms of engaging our older folks that way. So that's point one, groups that are specifically geared toward the spiritual needs of older adults. The second group there up on the screen, the second point I would say up on the screen there is we have learned to be aware of the most vulnerable in our midst. And when I say vulnerable, I'm not talking physical now. Now I'm talking emotional and spiritual. So the first group that jumps out to us in the context of older, the widows and widowers. And I say they are particularly vulnerable, and they are in our midst here, and we can do certain things in the midst of a faith community sometimes that can't be done elsewhere. We just read a statistic. This was just recently. The guy that leads care here, that 70% of widows that will be diagnosed with clinical depression in the first month of the loss of their husbands, and 50% will end up leaving the church. So 50% of widows, generally speaking, leave the church because they don't feel like they fit in anymore. So what do? That's a vulnerability and awareness of it. So we create a meeting point, a gathering point, a connection point on the basis of being a widow or being a widower. So we have a group here, for example, called Widows Connect. That's exactly what the group's called. And it's mostly older women. Now, not always, but generally speaking, most of the widows in the midst of our church are older. And we try and communicate to them and help them understand that they need connection, they need fellowship, they need engagement and interaction. And even if they don't want to at first, now you obviously can't force people to connect, but you can tailor a group on the basis of a shared experience and a shared loss even, and a shared hurt, and then intentionally turn the shared commiserating to mutual encouragement, right? I mean, if you're all in the room and you all have the same wound, the same hurt, the same loss, we can easily move that toward a shared encouragement, and it ends up being a great blessing that way. And create different points of engagement that are very practical for that age group. In this case with widows, for example, one of the times we'll talk about what it looks like to cook healthy for one person. And that's different than they've always done for all of their life. How can you be safe as a widow, when you go out and you're in the marketplace? What are very practical things that you can do and how you can do them? So even in our church, we create groups like this. So that's a vulnerability to try and speak to. Grief is a vulnerability. Grief makes you vulnerable from a biblical perspective, from the perspective of what we do in a faith community. So while grief isn't exclusively associated with older adults, again, for the same reason, because they're the ones who most often experience loss of loved ones and loss of critical connections like that. So we kind of cater to reaching out with grief how you work through grief, how you handle grief. We have a group here, for example, called Grief Share, and we run it regularly, multiple times a year, to engage people who are dealing with things that they grieve over, to help them, to to lift them up and give them a perspective from our case, a biblical perspective on how God would help you through that and how people can help you through grief. The other big category I think that churches need to pay attention to, and we try very hard to pay attention to, and this again is almost always our older community, those that we sometimes refer to as shut-ins. I mean, my father's 85. We just moved him out of his house that he lived in for 55 years. And the last 3, 4, 5 years, he was unable to drive because of eyesight issues. He was, technically speaking, a shut-in. He was not able to get out on his own. And so, and some folks, if he doesn't have a ride to church, he doesn't have a ride to us, then we must go to him. And so we have an entire group that are constructed around going to folks that are shut in for one reason or another. I mean, did not, obviously COVID and all the issues we went through, that gave us all a taste of what it felt like to be a shut-in. And it was terrible. It was miserable. Now imagine you live that, and imagine you're part of a faith community and that you no longer can be part of physically. We would say, man, construct on a basis of the faith community. You actually go to them and regularly. So there's regular visits and regular opportunities to go and help them spiritually. And so that's critical. Third point, and this is important for us, and I think sometimes we miss this, that we would look at our older community and encourage and even challenge them to grow spiritually speaking. There's a great verse in scripture that talks about how God shapes us through the renewing of our mind, and it's kind of never done by the growing of, and we talked about mind, and it was good listening to you, Luke. In scripture, I think your mind is your spirit. Your brain is an organ in your body, but what exactly is your mind? Well, we would understand that in the context of the way we move from a faith perspective, that your mind is it is that part of you which is the intangible part, your spirit. It really is who you are in a very real sense in your body. And so we would say in a faith community that God challenges us to be transformed by the renewing of our mind. And in so doing, you'll understand God better. You'll grow. So we want to stretch and transform someone's mind, even in the case where their body is no longer able to stretch, and they're on the loss from a body perspective. But we want to stretch people and ask them to grow from a mind perspective. Being careful not to just stop growing. Sometimes you need to slow down or come to a near halt physically. But really encourage and challenge people to grow in spiritual wisdom, spiritual knowledge. And I love to challenge the grandparents and the great-grandparents that are in our midst that to get wiser. Just because you have gray hair or no hair doesn't make you wise. We've all met those groups. And so we challenge our older folks, but you ought to be, because you have mileage on your soul and you've learned some things through life, and those are things that you can grow in and hopefully even share in. So I really feel in a faith community we can challenge folks that God made you to be learners, and you ought to be learning. Which really leads me to my next point, which is basically to speak value into and seek value from an older adult's life. If we learn something, for sure, if we're paying attention, sometimes older folks feel like they don't belong anymore because their function is getting less and less physically, and their value decreases as a result. So again, I would point to things that we learn from scripture that way. There's great passages that talk about a spiritual body, a spiritual community being exactly that. I already used the word a body, and it's compared to a physical body that's got an eye, an ear, a nose, an eye, a foot, a hand. And, in the context of that being explained, the point is being made that every part is needed and every part is valuable. And it's true, sometimes in a church body, the older adults, because their lives slow down and mobility slows down. And to be quite frank, sometimes churches have to be very careful not to forget they got to be adding new people, adding faith communities need to focus on bringing in the next generation too. And sometimes when you do that and you're not careful about how you're handling your older community, your older adult community, they can feel like they don't belong anymore, they're neglected, or the familiarity issue tackles them. So I want to say specifically to speak value into an older adult's life, and the best way to do that is to seek value from an older adult's life. So find valuable roles, for example, in the context of the church or the faith community where they can be involved. You need their age, you need their experience. They have something to offer by virtue of the fact that they are where they're at in life. So for example, we try and connect and pair up an older adult with a younger person in their faith for discipleship. That's kind of like an apprentice relationship where you've got an apprentice who's learning a trade. Think of the trades. You're a bricklayer, you're an electrician, you're a whatever, fill in the blank, and you often serve an apprenticeship. That's exactly what discipleship is, where someone comes alongside of you who's done this before and has been through it before. They're kind of like the master of the trade, so to say, and they shape you and mold you. So we want to actively try and hook up, connect the older adults with the younger faith folks and that shows value to the older adults. I need you. You play a role and you're valuable that way. So cross-generational discipleship is a good thing and a critical thing. Sometimes churches and sometimes faith communities, they gear towards one demographic only, and you end up hurting all the others. So I would say we challenge ourselves here to make sure that we don't get to that spot. And the last one, I'd say this ought to be the most obvious, and this is something I get to do in a faith community that oftentimes you don't get to do. And the last one would be to give them hope. And when I say hope, I'm not talking about hope that hope that their body's going to get better, or hope that this thing's going to change in their life, or it's the idea of hope that they can see value and purpose in this life, so that they can look forward to something beyond this life. And that is a faith community. That is what we point to. How we can smile about it with great respect, but say at the same time, death is batting 100%. In the end, death is going to get you. We're all going to have our turn there, short of something very odd or very unusual, because that is the realm that we live in. That it is normative. We're all going to have that moment. Every funeral I get to do with a group, I say, listen, we're all going to have our turn. We're going to be the one up in the front of the room. And so, and we would say in a faith community, this isn't the end. So we point that in a faith community, we give and teach hope beyond this broken world, aging body, broken body, everything else. I mean, I was a senior research engineer at NASA for many years. And I'll tell you by experience, science does not answer the most important questions of life. And that's true. And so a faith community can actually answer some of those incredibly important questions of life. And so we get to do that. So I would say in a faith community, what you're probably not going to get, for obvious reasons, in the marketplace or in those who are of great value, who help older adults, sometimes you can't get what exactly a faith community is designed for. Hope beyond the circumstances that we're all eventually going to find ourselves in. And it's bigger than wishful thinking. Obviously, it's where we move and are geared towards gain after the loss of everything here. So that's important. And I think I think that's when you find a person who's well, who's spiritually well, when everything else is falling apart around them. And I'd finish here where I started. They are experiencing loss, but they can be really well off in the context of all that loss if there's hope for something beyond that. So that's what we aim for. That's what we gear towards. And like I said, I don't think we've got that all mastered and figured out. We say this with humility. We're still, this is always a work in progress. But those are the things that we really aim for in a faith community to help our older communities in particular.
Right. Any questions for Pastor Castelli? I have questions about your time at NASA. I didn't know that was a thing, so I'll save those for another time, but you'll be hearing from me.
Okay, yeah.
Right. Feel free to drop any in the chat or unmute. I'll just close this off then by saying thank you both for both of those presentations. It's funny because both of you had called me in the weeks leading up to this asking, what is it exactly that you're looking for from this presentation? And you both hit the nail right on the head. It's exactly what I was envisioning. And it was exactly what I needed to hear today. So if you two want to take anything from this, it is that, at least for me, if not the other 17 people on this call and the people that will watch this subsequently, that it was exactly what I needed today. And it was really great information to have, and I'm sure stuff that we will be taking with us into our personal and professional lives. And thank you both for the work that you are both doing. So I will say save the date, next meeting, December 16th, 12 p.m. on Zoom. My contact information is there. And then, like I said, I'll get the recording out, I'll get the slides out, I'll get the handouts out to you all. I'll check the chat real fast. To make sure we didn't miss any questions. It's a lot of thank yous and good reviews, which I have to agree with. So thank you all. Thanks to our presenters, and thank you all for jumping on. We will see you in December.